Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is an okay film at best, but in the end it's a disappointing, messy, and overall not that great conclusion to the Star Wars saga. I think this film's production is something that is almost as messy as the film it created, and there are a lot of issues both behind the scenes and what we see on screen. This film could have been absolutely incredible, but the execution of the ideas present completely shattered any possibility of that happening. I wouldn't go as far to call this a cinematic disaster, but it's definitely a disappointing finale. But you're not here to hear me ramble. Let's go into the straight up reasons why The Rise of Skywalker is objectively not a very good film. In the opening of the film, we see Poe use a technique called Lightspeed skipping, which I think is a great metaphor for the pace of this movie. It's just one location to another location to another location in such a quick succession that you could hardly keep up. Your brain is just spinning as you have no idea what the hell is going on. A breakneck pace can sometimes serve films, particularly if it's a standalone film and you wish to introduce a bunch of new characters. However, this is the end of a trilogy that seems to want to introduce more than the two films that preceded it. The whole first 15 minutes of the film feel like a montage of J.J. Abrams trying to quickly sweep The Last Jedi under the rug, and it doesn't matter what your opinion of The Last Jedi is, he should have tried to continue the story. It's the point of a trilogy. Even if you don't like something, it's still a part of the story. This issue plagues the film from start to finish. The pacing is so fast the whole time that it feels like they're crushing a 5-hour story into 2.5 hours. Let's look at the character of Zori Bliss. She apparently has a history with Poe, as they both used to run spice together. And in one scene she's saying she doesn't trust him. Hell, at the start she attacks him. In the next scene they're on the roof and she's offering to go with Poe, to go away from the war, and use this medallion thing to escape. In one scene, she goes from not trusting him to wishing to spend the rest of her life with him. Hell, let's look at the final battle. Lando comes back and the music starts to build. The reinforcements are here, there's more ships than we've ever seen. The music is still building, and then it cuts away. That moment doesn't get that gravitas that something like, say, Avengers Endgame did with the portal scene. That happens constantly in this film. When Rey pulls the lightsaber towards her, there's a slight musical cue, and then she just kills the Emperor. These things aren't able to be given the amount of time they deserve, the amount of build-up, the amount of gravitas, because the rest of the film is such a mess that these need to just quickly get over and done with, tie up as many loose ends as they can, because they've thrown so many loose ends up into the sky. It partly feels like JJ just sort of went in with his mystery box approach and threw as many questions up in the air as he could, and then halfway through production realized, oh crap, I've got to catch these now, and he went and tried to get all of them in about 3 minutes. Hell, there is still some loose ends floating around. At one point, Finn says that he needs to tell Rey something. Later on, Poe asks what that thing was. That thing never gets said in the whole movie. It's later been revealed that he was going to tell Rey that he was Force sensitive, which is another plot point that isn't really baked fully through. He is constantly feeling the Force, he's talking about the Force, saying he believes in the Force, but he doesn't do anything with it, and he never even confirms that he is Force sensitive. The fast pace of the movie makes it so all of the beats that are actually in the film either get half-baked and half-completed, or rushed through to the end so they feel like nothing. That life, that spirit that is normally in these moments, those moments that you walk out just thinking of. Hell, even if you didn't like The Last Jedi, again, you probably can think of the Lightspeed scene, or the Rey catching the lightsaber scene, or the Rey and Kylo against Praetorian Guards scene. They just pop into your head because they had this weight to them, and these stakes. But these moments, they feel dead. Nothing comes of them. And when you walk out of the theater, your head is just spinning because you've had so many ideas enter your head, but none of them actually complete. And it really is just a shame, because the ideas are there. The basis for some cool things are there. It's like a seed that's been planted that never grows, and that's what makes this film so disappointing to me. The pacing is so fast that nothing can actually get done, because everything's being pushed through so rapidly that the weight just isn't there. The simple solution here would just be to get rid of a couple of MacGuffins. In this film, the heroes have to find the Sith dagger, save Chewie after it gets kidnapped, reprogram C-3PO to read the dagger, go to the Death Star ruins to find a Wayfinder. That Wayfinder gets destroyed, so Rey steals Kylo Ren's TIE Fighter. She finds the Wayfinder in the TIE Fighter, and then she goes to Exegol, leading the Resistance there. Instead, get rid of the dagger. Make it so they don't have to reprogram 3PO. Get rid of having to find the second Wayfinder. Get rid of Rey having to steal the other Wayfinder. Make it so Chewie doesn't get kidnapped. Any one of those things would make this film have a lot more breathing room. Instead, it feels so suffocated and so rapid that, again, there's just sort of nothing to think about. I've put this first because I think it's the biggest filmic problem with this movie. The pacing just completely destroys the whole movie. And a lot of movies have pacing issues in one section. I mean, even The Last Jedi was a bit quick at parts at the start, but it was nothing compared to this movie. This movie is so fast for the whole movie that it just feels like you can't breathe. It's constantly thing after thing, where one thing makes you forget another thing, and then you come out as if you never watched the movie. I think JJ watched The Last Jedi and took the line "let the past die" a bit too seriously. This film doesn't feel like a sequel to The Last Jedi. It just feels like Episode 8, except JJ's version, and that's probably why it doesn't have that sense of finality. Instead of trying to build on what Ryan did in Episode 8, JJ completely destroys as much as he can. To me, it seems like after he made The Force Awakens, JJ had a rough outline of what he would have done if he did Episode 8 and 9. And I think he kept that outline, and when he came to do Episode 9, he tried to stuff Ryan's 8 into his mold for Episode 9 as tightly as he could. And this makes it feel like Episode 9 never happened. You almost have to fill the gaps in yourself. Again, another metaphor for this would be the repaired lightsaber. Instead of making Rey build her own lightsaber, he just got the lightsaber that was destroyed in Episode 8 and just put a little band-aid around it. No. Ryan says Rey's a nobody, so JJ says Rey's parents were nobody, but her grandparents are special. Snoke was nobody. He was just a stepping stone for Kylo Ren's power. No. Snoke was a clone thing, created thing of Palpatine. Palpatine was pulling the strings all along. Rose and Finn have something, maybe. Okay, that one I'm happy with them leaving out. But it's kind of funny that Rose just isn't a part of their little crew. Rose, you stay behind. General Leia wants you to stay behind. It's such a slap in the face to those who like The Last Jedi. And I know that half of you right now are getting a little angry because you think these changes are great. You think these changes were needed. But the issue is, 50% of the fandom like this film. So obviously, you're always going to disappoint one or the other. But I think it's obvious that if you're making one film in a trilogy, the next film should build on it instead of trying to retcon everything in it. And I think that if you're doing a 3-part story, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. It doesn't matter if you think it's bad or not. You have to continue the story from that point to make a cohesive trilogy. This does not do that. It completely rips it back. And I guess in hindsight, this could make a new synergy. The synergy being that the story is about the Palpatines and the Skywalkers and whatever. But is it right? In the future, this movie will dictate how we see Episode 7 and 8. But right now, it just doesn't meld. I would like to reiterate that this is not based on opinion. I'm not saying this because I'm a Last Jedi fan who wishes that story was continued. I'm saying this as an objective critic who believes that this trilogy should be one story. The story of the original trilogy is one story that all melds together. The same can go for the prequel trilogy. This does not feel like that, and that is why this movie, I feel, is deeply flawed. I think that if this movie continued the story that 7 and 8 set up, then it would have felt like one cohesive trilogy. But because of the decisions made in this movie, it feels like the entire trilogy is now completely separate from each other. One thing I've heard some people talk about, but really not that many, is the sort of strange way that they approached fan service in this movie. It seems to be something that's very surface level, but if you look into it just a little more, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. And I think this is a bit of a slap in the face to everyone who is watching this video, most likely, because I'm sure that most people that are watching this video, due to the nature of my channel, are huge Star Wars fans. Rey saying she's a Skywalker. In the moment, it's a cool moment, but if you look into it a bit more, it doesn't make any sense. During this whole trilogy, Rey has been trying to cling onto a legacy to try and form her identity for her, but her character arc has been her learning that she doesn't need a legacy to form her identity, and that she can do it herself. In this very movie, Luke tells her that the fact that she's a Palpatine isn't important. It's important that her spirit and that her being is on the light side. And the fact that her grandfather is literally the most evil guy in the galaxy is irrelevant because she can still form her identity. If at the end of this movie Rey said, "I'm Rey Palpatine," it would have made so much more sense, because it's showing that she is shunning that legacy. She is saying, that legacy doesn't matter, it's part of who I am, but it doesn't define me. But then by calling herself Rey Skywalker, she is then suddenly going back a step and just clinging to another legacy to define her, instead of trying to find her own identity within herself. Chewie getting a medal, again, in the moment it seems cool, but later, if you know the comics or if you know other parts of lore, Chewie didn't accept his medal. He got a medal, but I believe he gave it back because it's against Wookiee culture. But in this movie, you know, he's all happy about it. His second medal, which I guess he's just been given, he now is great with. And I guess this makes sense. I mean, this is now part of the canon. I think it's, you know, mostly accepted that if something happens in a movie, it overwrites something that happened in a book or comic. But does this mean that now in canon, Chewie didn't get a medal on purpose? I always took it that he didn't want a medal because of honor or, you know, something like that. But now he was purposely not given a medal for some reason, and to me, that seems like anti-fan service. Again, the general audience won't know this. The general audience will be like, oh cool, Chewie's getting a medal. They might not even recognize that it's the medal from the original movies. But I just can't shake this feeling that this movie isn't appealing to people who like Star Wars, except for the scene where you can hear, you know, the Jedi of the past. For the most part, all of the fan service here and all of the beats are almost just not aimed at hardcore Star Wars fans. Now, overall, this is quite a small nitpick, and what I'm criticizing here isn't the fact that these tiny parts of Star Wars lore have been reverted, or that fan service didn't hit correctly. That's obviously a nitpick. But what I'm trying to criticize is the fact that this is almost showing an attitude that this movie had to just sort of get it over and done with. Make it so the general audience gets that Star Wars movie, and so it can, you know, break more box office records and do well. And this movie has done well. It's a Star Wars movie, of course. But suddenly, the fact of me saying it's a Star Wars movie doesn't feel special anymore. When The Force Awakens came out, it was massive for people like me who love these films. And the same went for The Last Jedi. But this time, saying it was a Star Wars movie almost just feels like Disney was trying to get that paycheck. This movie doesn't feel like it's interested in ending the story that we've cared about for 40 years now. It doesn't feel like it's trying to bring a close to this massive saga. it feels like it's just trying to finally get rid of this trilogy and, good enough, that'll do. There's a couple lightsaber fights, that'll keep them entertained, and, in the moment-to-moment action, this movie is entertaining, but once you step back, you just feel so unfulfilled, and you feel like nothing really happened in the movie. I've been recording these segments out of order, so I don't know if I've already said this, but this movie feels dead. It doesn't feel as if there's any life in it, because it just feels like it was a moneymaker. It doesn't feel like it was trying to bring a close to this story. This section isn't about fan service, and it's not about how that was handled. What this section's about is why this movie was created. Because it doesn't feel like it was trying to bring an end to the saga, and some people might feel differently. To some people, this might feel like a love letter to fans. But when I look at this film, all I see is the big corporation trying to just fill the quota. They said a Star Wars movie would come out in 2019, so they just chucked one out. Didn't feel like it had the thought, the planning, and the feeling that goes into making any type of movie. But again, I do want to say about this section dipped a bit into my opinions, a bit more than I wanted them to, so do take that with a grain of salt. But from what I see, and from what I'm trying to analyze, this is what I see. But again, some people might feel differently, and it's a really subjective thing, so it's difficult to properly analyze. So take that section with a grain of salt and formulate your own opinion on that, because I think it is, in some areas, more opinion than fact. Let's talk about the production of this film, because I think it really reveals a lot about why this film failed. I think it's obvious that Disney wanted to reflect the original trilogy as much as they could when it came to the development of this films. The OT used practical effects, so we will do the same. The OT had 3 different directors for each film, we'll do the same. The OT had no plan from the start, we'll do the same. But the thing they're missing is the vision that George Lucas brought. I'm not saying that they had to bring George back in any way to make these films a success, but George was the driving force for the story. George only directed A New Hope, but he was there for Empire and Jedi, meaning that his vision was seen through when it came to the whole trilogy. In these films, they just sort of gave 3 different directors the free rein to do whatever they wanted, and this obviously created a completely incoherent story with no synergy whatsoever. I have no idea how a multi-billion-dollar company like Disney can make such a massive mistake. They didn't even have a rough outline with what they wanted to do. I think JJ made one, but Rian Johnson had every right to completely disregard it, and then JJ had every right to just completely retcon what Rian Johnson ended up doing. This is really bad production. I think it's also worth mentioning that Colin Trevorrow was meant to direct The Rise of Skywalker, but JJ had to take over, completely scrapping what Colin did. Maybe Colin and Ryan had some sort of synergy and they had a plan, but obviously it wasn't able to come through because JJ took over. I think it's really, really upsetting that they weren't able to just make a plan at the start, even if it was rough. Who knows how good this trilogy would have been if they knew Palpatine was coming back, or they knew Rey would become a Skywalker, or they knew that Rey was a Palpatine. Instead, we just got this jumbled mess. The sequel trilogy as a whole is a mess. This movie is a mess. And as fans, we sort of have to try and put the pieces together. I'm gonna say this now, and I think it's quite obvious from the start of this video, but I like The Last Jedi. It's a coherent story, it fits together on its own, and it has a lot of new and interesting ideas. This film just tries to undo that, which obviously I don't like because I like the original film, but what this movie does is it destroys the potential synergy this whole trilogy could have had. Yes, Episode 8 went in a different direction from 7, but at least it built on that. Imagine if at the start of Episode 8, they found Luke, and then they found out, no, that's not Luke. that's a clone of Luke, and Rey had to go and find the real Luke on a different island. Would have felt weird, wouldn't it have? But no, Rian instead made his whole story based, at least loosely, on The Force Awakens. This story is not based on The Last Jedi. This story disregards The Last Jedi, and regardless of how you feel about The Last Jedi, that is not how you should do it when it comes to a trilogy. When it comes to a trilogy, you continue the story of the last film. That is obvious, that is what they should have done, but instead, they decide to retcon the whole thing as if we wouldn't notice. Here is my verdict for this film and for the trilogy at large. This film is the worst sequel film. It's a mess, it has no direction, it is basically just a convoluted fetch quest at a pace that leaves your head spinning. It completely disregards The Last Jedi, completely destroying the synergy of the sequel trilogy. Rey's being a Skywalker makes no sense as it completely disregards her entire character arc for this trilogy. It does not conclude the saga as a whole. It hardly even concludes the trilogy. It leaves so much more to be done. It completely fails as a conclusion to this saga. It is not what it should have been. It had the potential to be great. It had some very interesting moments in it, but instead of fleshing them out, time was wasted on trying to disregard The Last Jedi and complete their fetch quests. I think this film had potential, and a director's cut of this film could be excellent. But instead, we're left with this mushy mess that does not reach the standard that movies such as The Last Jedi did. That is unfortunately my verdict for Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Objectively, it just doesn't work, and that's just what it is. However, I would like to mention at the very end of this video that I kinda like The Rise of Skywalker, which seems probably weird to everyone watching this video. I like it. I think it's fun. And I, as a moviegoer, I am okay just to overlook stuff like that. On my first viewing, I didn't like it, but on multiple viewings, I'm starting to like it. The thing is, I'm trying to look at this movie objectively. On my first viewing, I didn't like it, and if it takes multiple viewings to like a film, that shows a problem. And I started really looking into it, and this is the conclusion I've come to. These are the critiques that I have, and while I might like this movie, it doesn't change the truth. I don't think you should try and change your opinion based on this video. Just because the film isn't as good as it could have been, and it is flawed, doesn't mean you can't like it. Because hell, I made this video and I still like it. So please, don't try and form your opinion based on this sort of thing. But when it comes down to the objective facts about this film is flawed, and that's really all I have to say about it. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, please do like the video, and it would be great if you could subscribe and make more videos as much as I can. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope you have a great day.